Yeah, a little bit slow today, but hopefully this will go smoothly. Like I said, my internet's a little unstable, maybe with the storm or whatever is going on with my house. But anyway, hey everyone, thanks for having me today. Just a quick introduction about myself. My name is Matthew Podolinsky, and I'm a master's student at the Parks, Recreation, and Tourism Department at the University of Utah. And I'm excited to tell you guys about my research, which is my master's thesis, the effect of moral and threat appeals on reducing depreciative behavior at rock art sites. In this presentation, I'll just give you a quick background on my research and briefly cover my theoretical framework, and then jump into the actual study and finish with some preliminary findings. But to begin, Utah and the rest of the West, for that matter, are experiencing an increase in tourism numbers. While this can have many benefits, as you guys know, it can also lead to increasing depreciative behavior and the degradation of resources, both natural and cultural. One specific area of concern is the increase of depreciative behavior around rock art. Rock art, as many of you know, is fragile and non-renewable. And once these sites have been degraded or vandalized, it can be extremely difficult to repair, or they may be simply lost forever. So to protect these resources, research and action are necessary and important. And I have based my research procedures on studies around natural resource protection in the hopes that it will also be effective at rock art sites. To begin, I want to explain what depreciative behaviors are. Depreciative behaviors are actions that do degrade the quality of the cultural resource, and they may also degrade the experience of other visitors. These types of behaviors are typically unintentional. Visitors simply may engage in behaviors because they don't know the correct way to interact with the resource. They don't know the norms. They may also see past vandalism, such as etching, and think that they maybe can behave the same way. Visitors may just simply not know that they have an impact or how serious their impact may be with whatever the actions they're doing. Vandalism and theft are considered depreciative behavior in a way, but these types of actions are intentional, and the perpetrators generally know what they're doing is wrong. Therefore, they kind of fall into a slightly different category. To address the depreciative behavior, I turn to the norm activation theory of pro-social behavior. I'll do my best to accurately sum this up as quickly as possible, but the theory explains how norms can be activated to stimulate feelings of moral obligation within an individual, which ultimately can result in pro-social behavior or helping behavior. The norm activation theory assumes that every society has norms that dictate helping or pro-social behaviors, and furthermore, these norms are typically turned off. Therefore, these norms need to be activated in order for a person to perform a pro-social behavior. While initially used around social settings, the norm activation theory has been adapted to work in environmental settings. As such, pro-social behavior corresponds to pro-environmental behavior. With this as a tool, one can design interventions to activate these norms and reduce depreciative behaviors. Two common methods that I was researching were crafting moral and threat appeals. Moral appeals are designed to activate specific pro-social norms. Important are the reciprocity and the social responsibility norms. Reciprocity norms dictate that one should help those who have helped them and subsequently not harm the person or object that helped them. So in terms of cultural resources, one should not harm the cultural resource because these resources provide the visitor with happiness and awe. The social responsibility norm suggests that people have an obligation to the resources or the people who are dependent upon others for protection or assistance. So in this case, rock art is fragile, it's non-renewable, it's vulnerable, therefore visitors have an obligation to preserve this resource. The other approach is to reduce depreciative behaviors is to simply frighten visitors into a desired behavior. The Bureau of Land Management currently utilizes a similar approach through a sign incorporating language from the Archaeological Resource Protection Act. This sign threatened visitors with possible fines and potential arrest if one defaces historic or prehistoric sites or artifacts. Threat appeals are powerful tools used to influence behavior. However, there has been little research on this particular sign at reducing depreciative behaviors. But with these concepts in mind, the purpose of my study was to design, implement, and assess the effectiveness of moral and threat appeals aimed at reducing depreciative behaviors at cultural rock art sites. So the rock art panel that I chose for my research setting is the Rochester panel in Emery County. This site was recommended by the Bureau of Land Management in Price. This panel is associated with the Fremont culture that lived in the region 700 to 1500 years ago. I collected data between March 25th and June 9th of this year. And this study compared the number of depreciative behaviors committed by visitor groups across three conditions: a moral appeal, a threat appeal, which is the ARPA sign, and a no sign appeal. These conditions were tested over 2-week periods, and I collected a total of 42 days worth of data. In addition to the research, I collected 3 weeks of visitor surveys, and this would help me define the population. There are two different signs that were installed. This gives you an idea of what they look like: one moral appeal and one the threat appeal or the ARPA sign. To limit the amount of variables, the signs had to be as similar as possible. So I had to modify the ARPA sign a little bit. So the size, the font, the images, and the color are the same, but the messages are different. I guess I'll read the signs. I have a little bit of extra time here, but somebody is destroying the rock art: looting, excavating underneath the rock imagery, scratching, graffiti, dog urination, standing too close, or even touching can permanently damage these fragile sites. Such actions may damage rock art forever. Excavating may lead to erosion, scratching and graffiti leave permanent marks. Urine can corrode the rock itself. Breathing on or touching rock art can wear away fragile images. Please respect these cultural sites. Stand back, enjoy, and do not deface rock art. Imagine these rock art panels without modern etchings, with crisp and clean lines and shapes. This can be achieved if everyone practices harmless rock art etiquette. Your actions will help preserve rock art for the enjoyment of current and future generations. Stand back and don't erase the traces of America's past. The BLM's ARPA sign reads, "Who passed this way? Archaeological resources are fragile and irreplaceable, and the Archaeological Resource Protection Act of 1979 and the Federal Land Policy and Management Act of 1976 protect them for the benefit of all Americans. Please don't erase the traces of America's past. Any person who, without authorization, excavates, removes, damages, or otherwise alters or defaces any historic or prehistoric site, artifact, or object of antiquity on the public lands of the United States is subject to arrest and the penalty of law." So to capture instances of depreciative behavior, I had to install a wildlife camera. Initially, I installed the camera near the panel in the form of a birdhouse. However, it wasn't very discreet, as you can see from the people gazing directly at the camera. And this is a bad thing because you want to not influence people's behaviors. So I installed the location in a different location near to the panel, and I got a great data set. This is the images that we got, and the very first image of the slide. The next couple of slides and photographs give you an idea of my study or where I was. I had a great time working in the San Rafael swell. You can see the location of the Rochester panel and the area I got to really explore over those couple months. You can see in this picture, this is where I was situated to collect demographic surveys. In addition to my self-collection surveys, I had several volunteers help me with this part, and I am truly grateful for their assistance in collecting these surveys and for also keeping me company in the middle of the desert. You can also see that my living situation had its perks and its drawbacks. I unfortunately encountered the effects of depreciative behavior and vandalism at the Rochester panel. The one on the left is some excavation of a petroglyph near the main panel. And near the end of my data collection, I did discover some etching on and around the panel. This one in particular was etched on the main panel. I did report this to the BLM, and some of my footage might be of use to the authorities in finding out who perpetrated this. So there's some useful data from the surveys that give management agencies an idea of who's visiting rock art sites, particularly the Rochester. So for instance, I collected 201 surveys over 3 weeks, and these surveys typically showed that a typical visitor was mostly a white, over the age of 55, married male living in Utah. But because these surveys were collected during the pandemic, this information may be a little bit different in some other years. As of this date, my data set is still being coded, but I do hope to have this data in the next week or so, and then I can begin statistical analysis and begin preparing for my thesis and my thesis defense. But I do have some early findings. Unfortunately, one major finding is that depreciative behaviors do occur and will always probably occur. Throughout the study, during all three periods, the moral, threat, and no sign period, people touched the panel. There's a couple hittings with different objects besides people's fingers or hands. But during my own review of the video footage, my preliminary findings do suggest that signs work. It does appear there are less instances of touching during the periods where signs are installed. And it's difficult to say, but it does appear that the moral appeal sign was more effective than the ARPA sign. Furthermore, the only time that vandalism did occur was during the no sign period, and this further suggests that and supports the idea that signs are effective. Ultimately, and I'll reiterate this later too, I suggest more research on this topic is necessary. I have formulated a number of takeaways over the course of my research and my data collection. To begin, I don't particularly think the BLM ARPA sign is effective. I do believe it is important to state the rules and regulations, but I do consider the ARPA sign to have a broad message that covers all archaeological resources. The sign doesn't also describe acceptable behavior or how to, like, the correct rock art etiquette. I would suggest that agencies look into several message designs that are designed to address specific archaeological resources. I've had many ideas through the study on how to make signage more effective as well. I would suggest a combination of moral and of fear appeal messaging. And furthermore, perhaps a combination of descriptive signs and smaller warning signs. Those might be effective. So for example, having a large sign like my moral appeal that I showed you installed at the entrance to a rock art area, and then smaller signs closer to the actual resource that simply say, do not touch. Touching is the simplest form of depreciative behavior, so intuitively, anything else isn't allowed. Lastly, I highly suggest interpretation at all major rock art sites. So the Rochester panel, Buckhorn, 9 Mile, Newspaper Rock, for example. These sites are typically the sites that people will visit first, and this is an introduction to rock art. These sites can be utilized to educate visitors on rock art etiquette, and the hope is when they visit lesser known sites that do not have signage, they will have some background knowledge about rock art. So furthermore, I would say that more research on this topic is necessary. This is an exciting topic to explore, and I would recommend reaching out to other graduate students who are passionate about preserving these sites. But why is this study important, and why should we continue more research? Well, the headlines in just this last year speak to the problem. Tourism numbers are growing, and people want to witness rock art, and sadly, visitation brings its own problems. But to conclude, rock art is fragile and a non-renewable resource that is considered unique due to its ability to embody beliefs, stories, art, language, and culture. Rock art is one of humankind's most enduring form of art, representing the relationship between people and landscapes. And these sites are culturally, spiritually, and religiously significant to indigenous peoples. Unlike artifacts and museums, the location of rock art does enable people to view prehistoric art in its original setting. For these reasons, it is essential that rock art is protected and preserved. Studying and researching interventions, messaging, and education measures is necessary in order to reduce damage or the permanent loss of rock art. The hope is that this research that I've done will result in meaningful and beneficial information that land managers can use to preserve rock art. So, yeah.
All right, thank you, Matt.
Thanks, everybody.
And then, yeah, Amy Schlosser from the BLM, she just notes the ARPA signs are law enforcement purposes to make prosecution under criminal ARPA easier.
Definitely. I like I said, I think that those types of messaging are necessary and important for law enforcement. However, as you saw from the ARPA sign, they don't really give much education to visitors about how to interact with the rock art. So as I said, I think there should be a combination in there, but I do think it's really important for law enforcement.
Any other questions for Matt? And also, I want to point out, Matt is not an archaeologist. He's not in an archaeological grad school. which I feel is a very exciting opportunity for us to start partnering outside our very closed world of archaeology and actually looking at land management more holistically. So Matt is getting his graduate degree up at the University of Utah in the Parks, Recreation, and Tourism program, and he's coming at it from a much different angle than archaeologists, which we appreciated. I mean, he's an archaeologist now at this point.
I have a quick question. You showed what looked like two little ladders where you said they was excavating. Were they just trying to see more of it, or why would someone get up there and pull the dirt back from like that?
Did you hear that, Matt?
Okay. I did. Yeah. So yeah, the photograph I have is a little bit hard to tell. So it's three different anthropomorphic figures that kind of look like ladders. They just over time, it looks like a lot of the sand from a lot of surrounding rocks have like covered half of them. So over the last decades or so, it seems like people are trying to excavate to like show more of the images, and so they're starting to excavate below the actual images or to see more. So
okay, yeah, right. And I think the sign, as you suggest, is important because I've looked at sites like that, but I never thought that standing too close would be a problem. If you're not touching it, you think there's no problem because I'm not damaging anything. But just to know that you can breathe on it and damage it is something I didn't know. So, but then I'm not an archaeologist either. So,
yeah, I agree with you. I've been learning quite a bit. I've been working with Utah SHPO, and they've kind of educated me on different aspects of rock art etiquette. And I would say like it seems like breathing or being too close might have a little bit more of a negative impact on pictographs, somewhat on pictographs for sure, just because of the paint and the different colors. So.
Yeah, thank you, Matt. And you know, I just want to give a shout out to the Price BLM office for finding some funds to support Matt's research and sign fabrication. I think there's a lot more opportunities out there for us to find creative ways to get more research done, which is part of that data aspect of that three-legged stool and how to better protect these sites, because we don't have data, we have anecdotes, and sometimes those get us in trouble. We assume, but don't have the facts to back it up. And then Wendy from Commonwealth, she says, I appreciate the view of the issue from outside the field of archaeology. The perspective of a non-archaeologist really helps to understand the perspective of most rock art tourists. So I completely agree that we get trapped in our own head as archaeologists often. And we just want to hit everybody with a stick. But that's maybe just me. All right, any other questions for Matt?
Thanks, Matt, for letting me participate in that project. I'm a little curious, and Chris, maybe you can help me here, but we were able to turn over some video to the BLM on that vandalism, the vandalism of that rock art site. But we never heard anything back as to whether or not that was helpful. Is that normal procedure that they don't give us any feedback? Do you know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, so I can hop in, Matt.
Yeah, I
Okay.
turned over some footage.
Yeah, you're lagging. Sorry, bud. Yes, Jeff, we did send that along and we confirmed that they had received it. It is often very much the case with the law enforcement is that you kind of get an acknowledgement, thank you, and then it's into the world of law enforcement because they don't want to further people's awareness that there's an active investigation or to tip anybody off or to tip any hands as far as criminal prosecution. So I think it's common, and probably the BLM archaeologists might know more of how this is progressing than we do because we're not the land managers.
Sure. Okay, thank you.
No, thank you, Jeff. No, and Matt's getting close to his master's, so find work for him. Keep him in this state. Give him a job. He's a rock star. We love working with him. And we need more people like him helping us do land management sort of stuff. So there's my shout out for you, Matt. Hopefully that check is in the mail.